All right. Good evening. Welcome wherever you are. You're listening to this in the morning, afternoon, anytime, any place. Welcome. Welcome to another edition, another session of Me in the Bible. Once again, taking a character, a person, an individual, a personality from the Torah, delving into their life in a little different, deeper, more personal way. Tonight, the character that we have chosen is Og, Og, the giant. And he is quite a fascinating story to tell. And he has a fascinating life lesson as well that we can all take something from. So let's get right in. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback and your questions, whether it's live or even after follow-up by email and so on, because it's so valuable. But first, for a little warm-up. So a Frenchman, a Russian, and an Englishman decide that they're going to visit an art museum. They come in and they are immediately drawn to a beautiful painting of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden right at the beginning of time. The Englishman takes a good look at the painting and says, they look so calm, they must be British. The Frenchman takes a look and says, no, they're so beautiful, they must be French. The Russian takes a look and says, hold on, they have no food, no shelter, nothing but an apple to eat. And they're being told that this is paradise. They are obviously Russian. Now, of course, why do I share this joke? Because the circumstances, the surroundings, the furniture, the belongings of a person can give us so much insight into their life. A lot of history is about taking artifacts and building stories around them. It tells us about the society where they lived. It tells us about the monetary situation, the financials. It tells us about the politics, the beliefs, and so on. So artifacts and museums and collections have always been a part of retelling a story. And when we have an item, we can build a lot off that. And so we might see a picture, a crown, a scroll, anything can give us a lot of insight. As we go through the Torah from the beginning of Genesis till the end, we don't really see the Torah giving us a lot of that extra detail. It doesn't always paint the imagery of what things looked like. Like, for example, Moses walking into Pharaoh's palace. There's a beautiful scene there. There's a very powerful royal scene. But it doesn't build that up. It doesn't describe the marble pillars and the lions and the dogs and the guards and all of that and the gardens. It doesn't describe Pharaoh's throne. Some of these details we have from the rabbis' tradition, but many of them we don't have. We just don't have these details. You know, think about Abraham's tent. We know it was four doors. He was very hospitable. Do we know the shape, the color, the size, and all of that? The breakup, the layout, the furniture he had inside? We don't. So where am I going with this? In this week's portion, there's a striking verse. And that is, as Moses is delivering his final words to the Jewish people, he recounts the history that they've spent together from when they left Egypt, through all the trials and tribulations, the ups and the downs, the successes and the challenges. And he's talking about the giant Og, and I'm going to give you the background into his life. But I want to start it off with an artifact. Moses goes into a little explanation, a description about the bed of Og, the bed. And it says that Og had a gigantic bed, and it was made out of iron, metal. And that's the detail that the Torah adds. And we stop and pause by such a verse, and we should all be puzzled by it. Why on earth is the Torah, which is so careful in every word, which is giving us only the details that are absolutely relevant and meaningful, telling us about the bed of an evil giant named Og, somebody who wanted to destroy the Jewish people? Why? Why such a detail? So puzzling, so strange, so out of character, so out of the norm for the Torah. So let's hold on to that question. In order to truly understand that question and the significance and the message of his bed, his iron bed, we have to go all the way back to the beginning of his life and see what a type of a person he was, to see his interactions with different people throughout the journey of his life. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. Right at the beginning of time, God created man, right? Adam and Eve, as my opening joke was. And as time progressed and generations came and went, they started becoming corrupt. They started following in idolatrous ways. Just wait 1 second. All right. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. So just to fill you right in.
Bye. Sorry, I'm late.
All right. Well, we're right at the beginning. So we were talking about the giant oak, and we mentioned as in the beginning that Moses describes the bed of this mighty giant oak and says that it was a bed made out of metal. Okay. So we're going back to the beginning of his life. So the people of the earth start becoming corrupt. They start doing lawless activities, idol worship, and many other sexually immoral behaviors, where there was a lack of modesty and a lack of morality. And God looks down at the earth and he says, I'm eradicating, I'm destroying it, I'm done. And two angels turn to God, and they say the angels' names are Shamchazai and Aziel. And they turn to God and says, you know, Master of the world, we warned you about this when you were consulting with us about your idea, so to speak, to create human beings, to create mankind. We told you they're going to become corrupt. They're going to get into this world. Yes, they'll have a pure soul, but the temptations and all the challenges of life are just going to corrupt them. You should wipe them out completely. God said, replies to the angels. He says, you know what? If I do that, if I eradicate the human race from the earth, who is going to be in the world? I just created a beautiful world. After I destroy them, who is going to occupy it? Who is going to inhabit the earth? And these two angels said, God, we will have it. We will overcome the temptations, and we are happy to have it. And God tells these two angels and says that I know that if you, angels, dwell on earth, the evil inclination will overcome you, and you will behave worse than the human race is behaving right now. And they said, give us your permission. We'll take the challenge. We'll take the risk, and we'll see. You will see how we can sanctify your name. So God says, okay, deal. You can have this agreement, and let's see how you do. And they assume a physical figure, and they stop being angelical, and they now are human beings. They take on a human form. These are known as the Nephilim, those who fell. Why? Because they fell from the sky, and they were the ones who fell in their stature of holiness because they did not succeed. They failed miserably. They could not control any of their impulses. They immediately chased beautiful women and girls, and they did terrible, terrible sins and all types of immoral and lewd behavior. And so God says, you know, there's no divine presence, there's no divine image over here on you anymore. And so the whole place is corrupted. Good and bad, animals and people, there's no differences anymore. The natural fear that animals have of people is gone. It's just one big mess. And then it moves on to tell us about the flood. So what do we know about these people, these Nephilim, as they're called, those who fell? That they were giants. But they weren't just the giants equal in size to the inhabitants of earth at the time. They were giants in size, even in comparison to the giants there. And that is where we have Og. Og is a descendant of these people, right? They assume this physical form, and they start having children as human beings. And Og, the mighty giant, is born. Just to give you somewhat of an understanding, the tradition is that approximately Og's ankle is about 30 feet high. Now go figure 30 feet ankle and how huge and tremendous that is. So that's beyond anything that we can relate to in the sense of a human being, right? Goliath, who is known as a mighty giant, is approximately 7 or 8 feet. So I would be scared if I met Goliath, especially if he's broad, built, muscular, holding his military equipment, his armor, his helmet. He's big. I don't want to meet Goliath in a dark alley. I don't want to meet him anywhere. But he's an ant. He's a nothing compared to Og. So just to put into comparison some of the tradition, some of the teachings that we have in regards to the size of these people, okay? So Og is an exception because where did all the other giants go? Well, along comes the flood. The earth was corrupted. God says, Noah and your family, I'm going to save you. But everybody else, we're done. We're done with this. We are not God says, I'm not dealing with this corruption anymore, this idol worship, this immorality, all of that. I'm not handling it, God says, I'm destroying it. So Noah builds the Teva, he builds that ark, but tradition has it, we're taught, our sages tell us that this mighty giant named Og actually was rescued on the Teva. There was this like massive porch almost that he was able to survive on. You know, if I go back to my preschool days, I always have this imagery of this giant holding up an umbrella on the top of the ark. Of course, an umbrella wouldn't do you any good, but in my childhood mind, that was the imagery, right? Everybody else is protected inside the ark, the fish are underneath, and here you have the giant almost lying on top, taking shelter, but not really very well protected from the elements, but at least he survives. And God keeps him alive. And we don't hear much about him until a few generations later. Along comes Abraham, Avram, our forefather, and Sarah, our mother. And Sarah is exceptionally beautiful, and Abraham is exceptionally strong and beautiful and pious and so on. And what happens is Abraham and Sarah don't actually have kids, right? We know that for many years, till Sarah was 90 and Abraham was 100, they didn't have kids. And Og used to mock them and insult them and tease them. And finally, when Isaac is born, Og appears at the party. Why not? Who's going to say no to a big bash? He made a huge feast. And everyone started laughing at Og and say, you see, you were wrong. You used to make fun of these people. See, Abraham is going to have offsprings. He's going to have descendants. Look. And he says, who? You talking about that little pipsqueak, that little tiny baby in the crib? I could squash him with my bare hands. He's a nothing. He's a nobody. I don't give that baby any credibility of survival. Of course, it doesn't end up happening, but that is precisely what he does. So that feast is he denies godliness at that point. He denies God's mercy. He looks at it as a nothing. Now God is going to punish him for that statement because it went against all the faith that everyone was having to God when seeing the miracle of Isaac's birth. Another incident is when Abraham's nephew, who was Lot, and we covered Lot in a class for himself all the way back in the book of Genesis. And Lot parted ways with Abraham, and he went to the city of Sodom, a wicked city. And the Torah tells us an interesting narrative about 4 kings fighting against 5 kings, and how the 4 kings, although they were less in number, were actually mightier. And they beat and subdued and conquered the 5 kings, and with that, all of the people and the property and so on of the 5 kings. Included in those was the city of Sodom. Sodom lost the battle, and now they were captive. So Og, who wasn't specifically on any side of the battle, he's kind of just his own guy doing his own thing, his own immoral things, as we'll see. He informs Abraham, he says, Abraham, you should know that your nephew Lot was captured. He was imprisoned. And, you know, who knows what's going to happen to him? He's in danger. Now, that was actually Passover, we're told. There was a Passover evening. Now, that sounds like a very nice thing to do. You know, go tell someone that your family member is in trouble. You should actually, you should get praised for it. But the truth is that Og had a very evil intent. He knew that Abraham is not going to just let his nephew be in trouble. He's not going to just let this go by the side and watch him struggle or get killed or be imprisoned for his life. He knew that Abraham was going to wage a war. Now, in Og's head, he's thinking, here you have Abraham going to fight against these 4 mighty kings. Forget it. He's over. He's going to perish. He's going to be exterminated, eliminated in a moment. So he's secretly hoping that Abraham does react, does go into battle, but he hopes that Abraham dies in battle because he has his eyes on a beautiful woman named Sarah. And that was the intent in his heart, that he really wanted Abraham's wife. Sarah was beautiful, and he had a crush on her. He had a desire, a horrible desire to marry Sarah. So he wanted Abraham killed. Of course, that's not what happened. Abraham is victorious, a story for itself, and then the whole plan goes to the wayside. Okay, so God again says, your wicked plan is going to cost you. You wanted Abraham to be killed at the hands of these kings. You, Og, the wicked giant, are going to get punished through who? Not through an outside nation, but through the very descendants of Abraham who you wanted to destroy. That's the next thing that we know about Og. Finally, we know that when Jacob comes to Pharaoh, right, many years later, the whole story with Joseph and all the brothers and so on, Jacob arrives and he comes to Pharaoh's court. And who would you know? Oh, he's everywhere. He's always in the right place. And he happened to be a good friend of the Egyptian Pharaoh. So you have Og and you have Pharaoh. Kind of makes sense politically to be on good terms with a guy like Og. So they were friends. So Pharaoh introduces Jacob to Og, and he says, you know, this is a grandson of Abraham. And you, Og, used to claim, right, used to make fun, just as I told you about that baby who he said he would crush. You used to make fun that Abraham's not going to have any offsprings. And Og at that point was a little bit disgruntled. He was a little bit hurt, embarrassed maybe. His ego was tarnished, and he puts an evil eye on Jacob and his descendants, almost wishing them ill, wishing them bad, like a bad omen on them. And again, God affirms his promise that one day their descendants, Abraham and now Jacob's descendants, will overcome you, the evil giant. So that is the progression that we have. So on the one hand, he was mighty. And with that might is tremendous abilities, tremendous talent, tremendous opportunity. But on the other hand, with that can come tremendous promiscuity, immorality, and power seeking and hate. But here we have a fascinating point. Why wait? He wants to kill Abraham by the war. Why didn't God punish him then? He mocks Isaac in the crib. Why doesn't God punish him then? He casts this evil omen on Jacob and the Jewish people. Why didn't God punish him then? But no, he waits for many more years until finally the Jewish people are at the cusp of getting into the land of Israel, where really Og is that human barrier literally blocking them from getting into the land of Israel. And then suddenly God says you could be punished. He's going to get his. Why? So from here we actually have a fascinating message. And it's not I wouldn't say it's the main point of tonight's class, because we're going to continue the journey and learn going back to his bed. Promise that to you. But what we do see here is why? Why did he survive for so long? And we're actually taught that it was a reward. God gave him this gift, a present, for having helped Lot and informing Abraham about Lot's capture. And even though he did it with ill intent, he did it for selfish reasons. He did it with an evil reckoning, but yet the deed was done. And the good deed, the outcome happened the way in a good, positive way. Now what? That Abraham eventually saves Lot. So God rewards him, even though his intention was bad. And this is something that we can meditate on and contemplate on and think to ourselves, you know, if God is rewarding this evil, wicked giant who eventually attempts to destroy the entire Jewish people for simply doing one good deed to save another person, how important is it, number one, to help save people when they're in trouble? But also, how important is it that we have the right intentions? Because if the reward and the divine blessing for such an action is so great, then for that type of person, then we can have it for ourselves as well. So that's as on the side point. But getting into it a little bit more, what happens next? What's the next part of the story? So now the Jewish people are about to enter the land of Israel. They have a couple more nations who they want to go through. Some refuse them permission. Now it's Og versus Moses. The Jewish people have stopped. They can't continue because Og is this mighty giant with a huge army behind him. But Og doesn't want or need in his head an army to fight militarily. He says, I'm going to do this. He goes over casually to a big mountain, a rock. It was practically a small mountain, and he picks it up over his head. Remember how high that must have been. And he looks at the Jewish camp, and he says, okay, I'll get them with one blow. Don't need to raise my sword. Don't need to call in any soldiers. I will just hurl this mighty mountain unto them, and it'll crush the Jewish people, and they'll be done. But God, of course, stops them. And Moses takes an axe, and he jumps up, and he swings it, and he knocks Og backwards. And eventually the mighty giant falls and dies. Before that, the mountain starts crumbling. God made termites come out of it, connected to his teeth, so he wasn't in a great shape. God obviously didn't want his plan to work. He was foiling. But eventually God gives Moses that power. And he utters the holy name of God, the Shem HaMefarash, the name that the holy name, and he destroys Og once and for all. And of course, everyone sees that. And when everyone sees that, they're terrified. If we overcame Og, this huge barrier of a man, then no one else is going to get through the Jews, which is why, in fact, later on, with the story of Bilam and Balak, they don't try to fight the Jewish people, they try to curse the Jewish people, because if Og falls, then no one's going to overcome. But at that moment, there's also a very unique and puzzling situation. And that is that if we go back to the verses about that showdown between the giant Og and Moses, the righteous spiritual leader of the Jewish people, we see something fascinating. And that is that God tells him, don't fear Og. You don't have to fear him. I will put him in your hands. He will fall before you. And that is a very unique phrase for God to tell that to Moses. Let's go back a second. Moses faced off with the greatest enemies of the Jewish people. He stood up to Pharaoh. Yes, he was hesitant. Yes, he said others should go. True. But he never expresses clearly that he's afraid of Pharaoh, per se. He just says Pharaoh's not going to listen. The Jewish people won't listen. He stood up to the other nations. Sichon, who was a relative of Og, he stands up to him. He stands up to many other nations throughout his journey, throughout his life. But for some reason, God doesn't have to reassure him, don't fear him, which almost says, you know what, I am afraid. We don't tell that to someone, my kid is in the park and they want to go down the slide, and I say, no, don't be scared, I'm going to catch you at the bottom, or don't be scared, I'm right here. If you fall off the swing, I'm going to catch you. Obviously, I'm reassuring my child that there is, I see you're afraid, you're hesitant, you've never been down such a big slide before, you've never gone on the big swing before, so you're hesitant. So I'm telling you, don't be afraid, I'm here. But if my kid just wants to kick the soccer ball, I don't say, don't be afraid. Or they want to go down the little baby slide, don't be afraid. No, I don't have to tell that to them, because there's no rationale to even assume that there's fear. But yet Moses fears Og. Ultimately, God reassures him and he takes him on and he wins, he's victorious. But why is he afraid of Og? And there's a number of different explanations, of course, as with many elements of Jewish study, of Torah study. So the simple understanding is always that those merits, the merit of saving life, being that informant in the positive sense, even though the intentions were bad, he is the informant to help save this person's life. And Abraham is able to help him that way as well. So in a sense, he's scared of him. But there's another element that the Kabbalistic teachings reveal. And that is that despite Og's mockery and scoffing and all of his evil, he was actually circumcised with Abraham. When Abraham got his circumcision, many others did that as well. It wasn't just him and his immediate family. It was all the people connected with Abraham and who he had an influence on. And clearly, again, always in the right place, was part of that moment as well. So Moses says, I'm somewhat afraid because he has the Brit Milah, the circumcision. This is unusual. Pharaoh, the other nations, this was not a merit that they had. So God says, no. He is a dead man. He is deserving of death from the times back then. I kept him alive. He earned his reward. He lived it out. Now he's done. So you don't have to be afraid. So that moment, Og perishes. And this mighty threat, this terror of a man is over. He lived a very long life from the times of the flood all the way till now. He's very old, very big, very strong, very dangerous, very evil. And there he is. He goes and he is able to effectively challenge the Jewish people one more time, and that is his death. Okay. So now to his bed. Why does Moses bring up the bed? So on a very simple level, when you talk about a giant and you describe their bed as being metal, it tells you that they were a strong, big person. But we know that. And that is a very simplistic explanation. But on a deeper level, there's something to be said. Let's think about it. Oid, very talented individual, very strong man, very physically, he was capable of doing great things, right? He could have been a protector of justice had he chosen to. He could have been a protector of women who were violated time and time again during those years. He could have done all that, but he didn't. Even more than that, he was given a gift, the gift of time, the gift of life. He should have been killed in the flood. He was a big exception. And instead of taking those gifts from God and using them out for good things, for positive accomplishments, to further kindness in the world, he went the other way. And if we think about it for a moment, a bed and a bedroom represents a very intimate and sacred space. And if we're going to try to pinpoint a physical object that can represent the holiest of moments or the most lewd, coarse, and promiscuous moments, is a bed. Because the act of two people coming together in a very private way, in a very intimate way, can be for the holiest of reasons, or it could be for the horrible reasons. It could be for the most coarse, crass reasons. When a husband and wife are together in a holy way, with respect, with true love, dignity of each other, with respecting the boundaries of marriage and the sanctity of it, then God's blessing is present in that room. It's like the Holy of Holies. But of course, there are times when people can use that experience for their own pleasure, as we saw with Og, many times taking forbidden wives, family members, sisters, cousins, mothers. The amount of immorality that was going on was terrible. So that bed represents the option, the choice of where do my priorities lie? Do I take all my talents, including, and maybe foremost, the gift of life, the gift of health, the gift of surviving maybe some challenges that some individuals might have? And do I go ahead and say, this is all mine. I'm going to do whatever I want with it. I'm going to do what makes me feel good. Or do I say, this is from God. I am going to use this to further my objective, to further my sacred mission in this world. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be using our talents to accomplish things. Someone who is gifted in the science, with a science head, can further their experience and exploration and discoveries. Someone who's gifted as a writer can further their abilities in that front. But we have to ask ourselves, where are my priorities? Am I so focused on my own physical talents and my own physical survival that I forget that these are godly gifts that I should use for other things? So, Og, if we think about it, he violated the sanctity of a bedroom. He violated the sanctity of his circumcision in that sense. And he reminds us how bad of a path we can take if we have our priorities mixed up. If we allow our natural talents and our gift of time, of life, of survival to overcome us, then we fall down a very bad path. This brings to mind powerful story of Sandy Koufax. Sandy Koufax, and all the sports fans will correct me if I get some of the details wrong, but Sandy Koufax was a great baseball player And one of the games for the World Series happened to fall out on Yom Kippur, Holy Day. And he wasn't particularly a religious Jew, but he was a Jew, and he knew it. And he was a practicing Jew on Yom Kippur. And he lets the team know he's not going to play. And as much as they beg and wish him, this starting pitcher, I believe, is not playing on Yom Kippur. And this made big splashes across the sports world and beyond, because here you have an individual whose life was dedicated to baseball. And everything you know about him, Sandy Koufax, a great baseball player, not the religious Jew, not the rabbi, not the dual. It wasn't a duality. He's a baseball player by trade, by passion, by publicity. That's who he is. And yet comes the moment of Yom Kippur, and he asks himself the question, what are my priorities? Are the gifts of talent in regards to baseball more important than Yom Kippur? Or am I switching things around? If I'm going to play that baseball game of Yom Kippur, then I'm really mixed up, because I'm over prioritizing my talent, my gift, and I'm making secondary that which really should come first, my connection to God. And everyone in their own level has to ask themselves these questions. Am I taking the money that God gives me, the financial success, and prioritizing my own success and my own luxuries over helping others? Or am I balancing it out? Yes, I'm taking care of myself, but I'm not forgetting that it's a gift from God and I should help others with that money. Same thing could be in any field, anything that we're doing. Am my priorities mixed up? Am I doing things wrong? And then the next part that it reminds us is that we have a question to ask ourselves. God gave me another day on earth. Some people can look back at each day and say, I really shouldn't be here. I went through God forbid, a terrible sickness, a terrible accident, a terrible moment. And I'm here because I'm a blessed survivor. Some of us, thank God, don't have those extreme traumatic moments which make us ask, I really shouldn't be here. Why am I here? But regardless, we can meditate and contemplate on the fact that I have every day as a gift. And you ask yourself the question, what will I do with those days? What will I do with that extra time that seems to be a bonus from God? Og, the giant, made a choice, and that was to pursue his lewd, crass, and coarse and immoral activities. He was handsome. He was physically beautiful. He got any girl he wanted. He fought any nation he wanted. Anyway, anyhow, he terrorized, he brutalized, whatever made him happy. But then we look at a person like Dr. Edith Eger, who we brought down to speak over Zoom a couple months ago. And you ask yourself, wow, what is it that keeps her going? She was gifted a second chance at life. Rationally, there's no way she should be here. Logically, she was dead, but she survived. And what she went on to build, as well as many other survivors, but I want to focus on her because she's a good example. She went on to learn from those lessons and become a psychologist par excellence to really guide and help other people. And the main message of her talks and her writings and her life is don't let your survival instinct, the part that survived, be the focus of your attention. I survived, so I deserve everyone's pity. I don't have to work hard anymore. No, you survived, so you got a gift, right? The gift that she was given, the name of her book, The Gift, because that gift of survival had her say, so now I'm going to use those talents, that time to help people, to make a difference in this world. And she does every single day. She continues to. As she grows older, she really gets that message out. And that is something that we could contemplate as well. Og survives the flood. He was unique, but yet he messes up because he mixed up his priorities. He allowed his own physical talents, his own survival mechanism. I'm great. I'm stronger than God. I'm stronger than the Jewish people. And went all against him. He gets killed. Because at the end of the day, such a thing as no continuous element. There's no way for it to survive. And this is really the message that Og's iron bed teaches us. That we have to ask ourselves every single day, I was given the chance to survive. Am I going to do with it? Use that bed, so to speak, that metaphorical bed, to further my own pleasures or to further create unifying moments between the world and God, between people and godliness, to bring divine beauty into the world? That's a question we ask ourselves every day. It's not easy. I just want to finish up with one point before I hear from you. I'd love to. And that is, there's an interesting point that the word barzel, which is the Hebrew word for iron in describing Og's bed, reminds us of. And that is, it reminds us that in the temple, there was no iron allowed. God said, building my home cannot have iron. Cannot have iron. Why? Because iron is what makes weapons, and weapons kill. The temple is a place that prolongs life, that gives back people a second chance, repentance, repairing themselves. So God says, in this holy place, there's no place for an object, for a material that ends life. And ultimately, that is a big contrast between Og's bed of metal and the temple. Og's bed of metal, of iron, is a place where it ends life, so to speak. It was a path of destruction, of no growth, of allowing his own talents, his own survival to become the rule. In God's home, we can't allow that to happen. We cannot allow any elements that will suck us out of the holy realm into that unification with God.